by removing product labels or changing packaging so that the goods can be certified as made in that second country. On April 18th, a woman in Shenzhen shared on RedNote that something outrageous happened. She said her company has a factory in Vietnam, and they often ship materials and semi-finished tools there. Before, as long as the paperwork was complete, everything could go smoothly. But this time, customs stopped their shipment.
As you know how long China specifically has been using other countries to basically send things to the United States of America to avoid basically the tariffs that Trump put on China when he first was president, guys, the ones that Biden left, right? The ones that no one complained about at all, specifically Democrats. They had nothing to say. They were completely fine with it because it was still it was benefiting the United States of America. They were completely fine with it, guys. Right? But as soon as Trump says, you know what, hey, listen, we need to tariff China again, they're like, no, we can't do that. That's too much. You're not being a nice guy. You hurt my feelings, guys. Either way, this is a suggestion via Discord. Let's go ahead and jump into it.
Recently, a re-export company based in Port Klang, Malaysia, posted a video on TikTok. In the footage, their workers were seen grinding off the fumigation marks on goods from China,
Guys.
trying to cover up the original country of origin.
Oh, it's
In
blatant
another
now,
video,
isn't it?
workers were shown unloading Chinese products in Malaysia and then putting Made in Malaysia labels on them. But this method, often used by Chinese companies, might not work for much longer. This tactic is called
Hopefully not.
washing the origin, or country of origin laundering. It means a company from one country uses loopholes in another
Guys, they're not even trying hard. It's a sticker. So now it tells me if you ever do see one of these stickers, bro, peel it off. See what's really going on here.
country's regulations by removing product labels or changing packaging so that the goods can be certified as made in that second country. On April 18th, a woman in Shenzhen shared on RedNote that something outrageous happened. She said her company has a factory in Vietnam, and they often ship materials and semi-finished tools there. Before, as long as the paperwork was complete, everything could go smoothly. But this time, customs stopped their shipment, opened up more than 2,000 semi-finished products, and said the items listed on the documents didn't match the actual goods. In the end, everything was sent back to China. Vietnam's
Wow,
move seems to
dude.
be in response to new U.S. tariff policies aimed at preventing origin laundering. After President Trump took office, he launched a reciprocal tariff policy on April 2nd. The U.S. started setting different tariff rates for different countries and regions, with China and most Southeast Asian countries facing tariffs over 30%. The Chinese government retaliated, and after 2 rounds of tit-for-tat tariff hikes, the U.S. is now imposing a 145% tariff on most goods from China, while China is imposing a 125% tariff on most goods from the U.S. Several Southeast Asian countries said they would try to negotiate and cooperate with the U.S. to achieve mutually beneficial trade.
Yeah, guys, that's going to be hard because, guys, you have to live over there, right? Like, I'm a realist here. You have to live over there. No one is going to come and help save you. And specifically, if you have a country in that region, Southeast Asia, that relies heavily on import, and that import is most likely coming from China, I can't imagine how you doing any type of like side deal with the United States of America is going to be to your benefit. Truthfully, I mean, I'm glad you guys are doing it to our benefit, let's say, right? But to your benefit, that doesn't make any sense, okay? I'm just going to be honest. You have to live over there. All right. That's like snitching on the bully, the big bully, right? And then having to live next door to him. Listen, China, like Xi Jinping already went on like a threat tour, I think they called it in Asia, guys. Threatening all the nations, basically saying, hey, listen, if you do anything, and I mean literally, if you do anything to cooperate with the United States government, then we are through. We will starve you out. That's basically what he's out here saying, guys. So I get it. I respect it, but I'm not sure that's to your benefit. All right, I'm a realist. But either way.
On April 9th, Trump announced a 90-day pause on reciprocal tariffs for some countries, including Vietnam, to allow time for negotiations. Even though Vietnam had earlier shown goodwill by lowering tariffs on U.S. imports, the White House refused to make similar concessions.
Yeah, they're
They
still
accused
doing
Vietnam of non-tariff
this.
cheating, saying the real problem was that China was using Vietnam to
Right. It's not Vietnam specifically. I mean, we don't buy a lot, right? But it's China specifically using Vietnam and Cambodia and Malaysia specifically to launder goods.
Vietnam of non-tariff cheating, saying the real problem was that China was using Vietnam to ship goods to the U.S. and avoid tariffs.
Yeah.
Vietnam's Ministry of Industry and Trade has now issued new rules to strictly control certificates of origin and supplier materials to prevent fraud. Against the backdrop of the US-China tariff war, CCP General Secretary Xi Jinping visited Vietnam, Malaysia, and Cambodia. This series of visits has drawn attention to the growing competition between China and the US in Southeast Asia. During his visit to Vietnam, Xi Jinping held talks with Tolam, the General Secretary of the Communist Party of Vietnam. Xi called on Vietnam to stand together against unilateral bullying and to protect global free trade and supply chain stability. His comments were clearly aimed at President Trump's global tariff policies. But Vietnam's leaders reacted cautiously to Xi's appeal, showing that they're taking a careful approach in balancing between the US and China. Taiwanese media outlet Shangbao pointed out that Xi Jinping's visit to Vietnam was originally meant to build an anti-US alliance, but
Absolutely.
Vietnam was not receptive. The joint statement signed by both sides was vague, mentioning only opposing hegemonism and power politics. This kind of language has been commonly used by Vietnam in the past, often implying criticism of China's actions in the South China Sea.
Of
Xi
course.
Jinping's visit to Vietnam caught the attention of President Trump. In the White House, Trump told reporters that Xi's meeting with Vietnamese leaders was intended to harm the US. However, after Xi
It was.
Jinping left Vietnam, a message released on Vietnam's government website on April 18th stated that Vietnamese Prime Minister Pham Minh Chinh had met with Jeffrey Perlman, chairman of the U.S. ASEAN Business Council. During the meeting, Pham said that Vietnam and the U.S. shared a unique bond, and that the relationship between the two countries was different from relations with other countries. According to the Vietnamese government's announcement, Pham Minh Chinh also stated that Vietnam had largely addressed U.S. concerns by proactively cutting taxes and increasing imports of American goods, and the country was ready to engage in discussions and negotiations. He added that Vietnam seeks to establish a sustainable, balanced trade relationship with the U.S.
They need to.
In recent years, the U.S. has become Vietnam's most
Everyone
important
needs
export
to.
market. Vietnam
Yes.
is a major production base for many Western companies, and last year its trade surplus with the U.S. exceeded 123 billion U.S. dollars. Regarding Xi's visit to Vietnam, Chinese state media reported
Yeah, guys, but how much of that was actually from Vietnam, and how much of it was actually, like, but truthfully from China, but they're just trying to wash the origin. Imagine how much of that did they actually build, guys?
that China and Vietnam signed 45 cooperation agreements covering areas like artificial intelligence, railways, and agricultural products. These agreements include China investing in railway construction and exporting AI technology. However, political commentator Tang Jingyuan pointed out that while Xi's visit appeared grand, the actual gains were limited. Most of the 45 agreements were one-sided concessions from China, such as China funding the railways and exporting AI technology, with Vietnam contributing little. Tang said that while Vietnam would not refuse these benefits offered by China, it is unwilling to take risks for China's origin laundering practices. Vietnam is well aware that its economic prosperity depends on the U.S., not China. Just 2 days after Trump initiated
To be honest, I'm surprised by that. But that's brand new information for me. If they actually feel that way, and this is just not some like random bot speaking type of thing, guys. If they actually do feel that way, then that's spectacular. Seriously. So then I guess we have to kind of look out for them as they are dropping their tariffs on us too, so we can kind of look out for them. If that makes any sense, guys, right? At the very least. But either way,
the tariff hikes on April 4th, Vietnamese Communist Party General
we have a long
Secretary
history,
Tolam
guys.
held a phone call with President Trump. Trump later said that Tolam had promised that if an agreement were reached, Vietnam would reduce tariffs on U.S. goods to zero. The Vietnamese government stated that Trump and Tolam agreed to continue talks to sign a bilateral tariff agreement as soon as possible, and added that Trump had accepted an invitation to visit Vietnam soon. On April 6th, China and Cambodia held a joint military exercise at the newly expanded Rang Naval Base in the Gulf of Thailand. This base, located in Cambodia, was renovated with Chinese funding, and the U.S. has expressed concerns that it may become a Chinese military outpost. Taiwanese scholar Song Guoxiang
It will. China specifically dominates the South China Sea. They do a lot of craziness out there, guys. Apologies for that sound, but yeah, they dominate it. They need to kind of yeah, relax a little bit, bro. Specifically for the people in the area, you can't. I mean, Yeah, monopolies are illegal here. Let's say allegedly illegal here because there are a lot of monopolies, guys. But they have no issue with that over there, and they're definitely acting as if they are that.
Stated that Cambodia has a pro-China political stance and relies on Chinese-funded
What is
infrastructure
that
and
car?
aid. It is also one of the few countries in the region that supports China's position on the South China Sea. Cambodia is unlikely to break away from
They're
China,
not going
but will
to.
likely see low-profile engagement with the U.S. to avoid sanctions. Sun Guoxiang stated that while the Chinese Communist Party tries to promote regional cooperation, even forming an anti-U.S. alliance in some cases, ASEAN countries have chosen to keep their distance, showing that these Southeast Asian countries place more importance on their trade relationships and market opportunities with the U.S. Taiwanese scholar Zhen Mingshi said that Southeast Asian countries base their decisions on their own national interests. In the past, they used to say, economy depends on China, security depends on the US. Now, security has likely become even more important, but the degree of economic reliance on China may gradually decrease. Shen Minshi also noted that before Xi Jinping's visit to Vietnam, ASEAN countries had already made a decision to take a negotiating and cooperative approach towards the U.S.'s tariff policies, rather than retaliating. Essentially, these countries want to maintain access to the U.S. market and
Of
avoid
course.
siding with the CCP. Professor Shi Yinhong from Renmin University of China believes that Southeast Asian leaders are aware that if they align too closely with the CCP, they could face punishment from Trump.
They will.
China expert Wang He stated that for ASEAN, the economic appeal of the U.S. far outweighs that of the CCP. The overall non-alignment stance of ASEAN is difficult for the CCP to sway. The two sides might negotiate on free trade area cooperation and economic integration, but it's unlikely that ASEAN countries will again become a stepping stone for Chinese products to reach the U.S. The U.S. will certainly block that route during bilateral negotiations with ASEAN.
Yes.
To address the issue of Chinese goods
Do
being
that
rerouted
immediately.
through Southeast Asia to bypass tariffs, the U.S. is intensifying scrutiny of certificates of origin and blocking transshipment trade. Several Southeast Asian countries have already taken concrete actions. Not only has Vietnam tightened controls on certificates of origin and raw materials, but Singapore's Customs and Ministry of Trade and Industry also issued an official statement, making it clear that the government will not tolerate companies intentionally using their connection with Singapore to evade or violate export controls from other countries. Appropriate actions will be taken against companies and individuals engaged in fraudulent or dishonest activities or attempting to evade export controls. Thailand's Department of Foreign Trade Director publicly stated that 42 types of products were recently found to be misusing Thai certificates of origin to bypass high US and European tariffs, particularly aluminum foil and electric bicycles.
Noted.
The Cambodian government
Yeah, because our market is completely flooded with them, and I don't see any, the tariffs basically hitting them based off the price of them. In fact, the e-bikes have absolutely dropped in prices for some reason. Let's say over the last 2 3 years, they've completely plummeted. So it tells me that we have an overabundance, let's say, of stock of these things, guys. Right? So and they're obviously being made in China. They're obviously being made in China. But why are there no tariffs on those things? Just a thought. Like, look at guys. Go to Amazon. Look for an e-bike and realize, well, I never knew they were that cheap. It's because of supply and demand, guys. We're flooded with them.
is developing new procedures and plans to control and prevent other countries from using Cambodia as a transshipment point for goods destined to the U.S. On April 16th, a working group led by Cambodian Deputy Prime Minister Sun Chanthol held the first round of trade talks with
So
U.S.
what
Representative
does
Robert
that
Lighthizer
say?
via video conference. Cambodia hopes to convince the U.S. to abandon plans to impose high tariffs on Cambodian goods.
No, sorry, can't do it, because you're only kind of agreeing with us to our faces, but in actuality, you're still doing business exclusively with China, right? Like you're still doing that. You still have no problem with Chinese manufacturers and factories opening up specifically in your country for the sole purpose of avoiding our tariffs. So unfortunately, no, thank you, sirs and madams.
Cambodia hopes to convince the U.S. to abandon plans to impose high tariffs on Cambodian goods.
Go higher,
Under President Trump's reciprocal tariff policy, Cambodian goods are subject to tariffs as high as
of course.
49%, higher than neighboring Laos and Vietnam. Casey Barnett, president of the American Chamber of Commerce in Cambodia, AmCham, told the media that if the U.S. Trade Representative sees Cambodia as a transshipment point for Chinese goods entering the U.S., it would be very detrimental to Cambodia.
Okay, then drop your tariffs on us. Drop them to zero. Do that. No? You want to keep us like at like 90%, bro?
According to reports from foreign media, Malaysia's Minister of Trade and Minister of Finance are scheduled to visit the U.S. by the end of April to negotiate tariffs with the Trump administration.
Look at that,
The
Cambodia,
Trump administration has imposed a
97%.
24% tariff on Malaysian goods, which will be delayed for 90 days. However, a 10% general tariff remains in place. Malaysia has stated that it will not implement retaliatory tariffs. The Malaysian government has repeatedly urged Chinese companies not to use Malaysia as a transshipment point to avoid U.S. tariffs. A Chinese blogger pointed out that in the past, transshipment trade has been in a gray area and on the margins, but now multiple countries have started to strictly inspect transshipment practices. Products must be produced and manufactured in the country to obtain certificates of origin. This means that transshipment trade is becoming more difficult to carry out. Another blogger in the foreign industry trade warned that many Southeast Asian countries have incomplete raw material supply chains, and many are directly importing from China for further processing. If you want to export these goods to the U.S. from third countries, you must obtain local certificates of origin. If the raw material composition doesn't meet the requirements, the goods may be deemed made in China and will not qualify for tariff preferences. This policy has put Chinese companies in a tough spot, as much of their production capacity and raw materials are concentrated in China. But now they're required to source locally, which is very difficult for these businesses. The blogger gave examples of products under strict inspection, many of which are areas where China's industrial chain is highly developed, such as honey, steel pipes, sinks, motors, generators, fiberglass, saw blades, and refrigerators. This policy targets Southeast Asia, but the U.S. is also preparing a strong plan to crack down on third-party transshipment. One key part of this plan is the establishment of a global goods tracking system, which will monitor goods from the first country to the second, third, and fourth countries.
Yeah, that sounds very expensive. We'll be honest here. If you're looking to track every single individual good that's coming into the United States of America specifically, then yeah, that sounds expensive. Okay, it's not like gold where you can basically, kind of like DNA test things. It's not a DNA test. You get what I'm saying here, where you could basically find out where a diamond comes from, or some type of mineral comes from. You're talking about something that was absolutely manufactured and put together with multiple pieces from multiple places into one. Guys, that sounds expensive to track. I'm gonna be honest here, and I'm not sure that I would want to pay for that.
This means that in the future, even if you simply change a label or alter the certificate of origin, it will no longer be easy to sell products in the U.S. market. The blogger mentioned that the purpose of implementing this tracking system is to impose joint punishment on transshipment trade. Once
Okay.
a company is found to be engaging in transshipment, all related companies in that country may face a direct suspension of their exports to the U.S. The goal is to deter businesses from taking risks with extreme measures. Another blogger pointed out that the U.S.'s tariff policy against China is no longer a single point attack, but has formed a
No, it's
comprehensive encircling
multifaceted.
blockade. He explained that the U.S. tariff policy against China not only targets bulk goods, but also affects small packages under $800. The newly implemented tariff system requires businesses to provide a complete production flowchart from raw materials to manufacturing and transportation, strengthening monitoring of the entire supply chain. In the future, almost every link in the supply chain must be scrutinized before Chinese goods can enter the U.S. market. Additionally,
Okay.
starting May 2nd, small packages from China and Hong Kong, valued at less than $800, will be subject to tariffs if they are sent to U.S. individuals. The common method of splitting large shipments into small ones will no longer be able to evade tariffs. The U.S. has also taken further actions against Chinese vessels. Regardless of the cargo's origin, Chinese-owned ships docking at U.S. ports must face high docking fees, potentially in the millions of dollars. The blogger said that the U.S. tariff policy is logically interconnected. First, there are the tariffs, followed by the establishment of new systems and strict supply chain inspections. Then there are restrictions on packages and vessels, with countries cooperating to implement a transshipment blockade. All of
Okay.
these measures together effectively close off the possibility of Chinese goods being exported to the U.S. through multiple channels. As Southeast Asian countries cooperate with U.S. policies and strengthen security and restrictions on Chinese-made products, the blogger advised Chinese foreign trade professionals to give up the fantasy of waiting for China-U.S. negotiations and start looking for alternative solutions as soon as possible. Some people believe that the U.S. tariff issue isn't that serious, but the blogger warned that many people will not be able to endure the pressure.
They're not going to.
现在
Like, this is absolutely going to wreck like a lot of people's businesses, specifically in China. This will do that. The same thing with Cambodia, the same thing with Malaysia, same thing with Vietnam. In fact, here, and honestly, guys, you had no problem, 50 to 60 years ago, even at times, when industry started leaving our country and going to other countries exclusively due to the fact that they were able to be paid a fraction of a percent, let's say, for the labor,
因为
guys.
我们由于这个全球一体化
It
啊，
We
hurts,
have a
guys. I
very
get it.
close relationship with the US, and suddenly decoupling will certainly have a deep impact. There's a saying that the sky won't fall, but for many foreign trade people, especially those in the middle class, they still have to pay their mortgages and car loans. This is already putting huge pressure on our current lives.
The blogger pointed out that in Shanxi, Henan, and
see
Hunan
that.
provinces, exports to the U.S. account for between 22% to 28% of the region's total exports. If China and the U.S. decouple, it will significantly impact the local economy, potentially leading to mass unemployment and affecting residents' income and consumption. Additionally, related industries like restaurants and services will also be affected. In Shenzhen, the annual export value to the U.S. exceeds 440 billion RMB, involving more than 4,400 companies, including many small and medium-sized enterprises and cross-border e-commerce businesses. However, the U.S. has begun taxing small packages under $800, adding new pressure on cross-border sellers. In Shanghai, there are 22,000 companies involved in exports to the U.S. Although local governments have proposed strategies for shifting foreign trade to domestic sales, China already faces issues with overcapacity and weak demand. Whether shifting to domestic sales can truly absorb foreign trade capacity remains uncertain, and the core
It won't. It just won't, because most of the people in China specifically live off of the labor that's created for sending things abroad, for example. So what you're doing now, I mean, yeah, things are going to get very cheap there. That would be actually beneficial to the people that are in China specifically. And again, this has nothing to do with the concept of the Chinese people themselves. This is more so the government that's kind of causing a lot of these things here. There's no ill will harbored towards any of the countries specifically that are being named here. Keep this in mind here, guys. I absolutely love Southeast Asia. Definitely. I've been to China multiple times. I've been to Vietnam. I've been to Malaysia, guys. I love this region here, guys. Absolutely. It's very different, but it's cool. But either
core
way,
issue will depend on whether residents have the income and confidence to support consumption. Zhejiang is also heavily affected. Many business owners in the region engage in global trade and have set up factories or businesses in Mexico, Southeast Asia, or even Europe. If they lose the U.S. market due to tariffs, orders flowing back to China will decrease, further impacting the domestic supply chain. The blogger concluded that the U.S. tariffs have already caused long-term damage to China's foreign trade businesses and individual economies. He reminded individuals and companies to face reality as soon as possible, avoid risks, and adjust strategies. The latest news reports that on April 21st, the Korea Customs Service announced that it had recently uncovered multiple cases of Chinese companies labeling products as made in Korea and exporting them to the U.S. The total value of these cases exceeded $20 million US. This comes just before high-level talks between the two countries. Additionally, according to Japanese media reports, in recent years, a large number of Chinese people have set up corporate entities in Tokyo, Osaka, and other cities.
oh,
There, they assemble, test, or repackage
Really?
products from China to label them as made in Japan.
yeah, guys, that's big business. We're gonna go ahead and move on. Here's the thing, guys. Of course they're doing that. Like, I mean, of course. Like, if you were someone who was moderately scrupulous in this context here, guys, let's just say that. Like, imagine all of the business that's about to come out of um, high tariffs on China. Imagine that. Because now, like, hey, listen, instead of paying the 245%, let's say, on top of things, let's say that, I'm going to go ahead and start a business, like some type of LLC or some type of shell corporation. I guess it won't be a shell corporation, but some type of LLC of sorts, right? In a foreign country, and then say, hey, listen, guys, go ahead and send that to me here. I'm going to relabel it, right? And you pay me like a middleman fee or something like that. And then imagine the money that's about to be made by some people. Wait a second. Hold on. Imagine the money that's going to be that's going to be made by a handful of people doing this, guys. The middleman. All right. It's not hard to open up another company like in a foreign country. You just need a proxy, basically. I'm not giving you advice, but you just basically need some type of proxy, like someone to do it, and you pay them like you know, a percentage or something, and then that's basic. I'm guessing that's that's what's going to happen. 100%. That's probably been happening. Now that I'm thinking about it right now, it's been happening. It's been happening for a long time. That's exactly what people are doing. Yeah. Yep. But all right, listen, guys, you guys all have an absolutely amazing day. The video came from the channel China Observer. If you guys are new here, please like and subscribe, and I'll catch you guys later.